Well, since Kurt's here, we'll go ahead and get started. Hope y'all are having a good week. Kind of quiet tonight. Wednesday after dark. Could be a tough crowd. Well, you should be excited to be in Isaiah 40. This is the good part of Isaiah. We're going to start book number 2. And before we just jump into chapter 40, I wanted to remind you of not what I wanted to do. Told you it was Wednesday after dark. A little delayed. Here we go. Okay. So I wanted just to remind you of how the book breaks down, kind of get us where we are. So we've looked at the first 39 chapters that deals with condemnation, judgment. And so there's where we've been, the way that first half kind of breaks down. It ends in exile. And despite the fact that it's pretty depressing, there are glimmers of hope throughout it. And the question becomes, well, one of the main questions becomes with these glimmers of hope is, well, when is that going to happen? When is a remnant going to return? When is this branch going to spring up? And what's that all about? So there's a renewal that's coming, and we've said that it involves the remnant coming back and resettling a country, but it seems to be more than that. And even in some of the prophecies that we've looked at, it is very unclear. I've tried to stress that throughout this study, how unclear prophecy is. We're on the other side of much of it, and it may seem obvious to us, but it's far from that. So there's a renewal coming, and especially as we get into 40 to 66, you see this. It's a very, very different book than the first half. The question is, well, when does that happen? Well, in Matthew chapter 1, it gives us a clear answer as to what the renewal is all about and to the timing of it. And this is how Isaiah frames, or how Matthew rather frames up his book in telling us about the Messiah. So after you get this real long genealogy with a bunch of confusing names that we tend to skip right over, shouldn't do that, but we do. It is stated here in verse 17, so all the generations from Abraham to David were 14 generations, and from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations, and from the deportation to Babylon to the Christ, 14 generations. So Matthew is using Isaiah to frame up the Messiah. The next section begins to uses Isaiah to talk about his birth, of course. The point is, in this last 14 generations from Babylon to the Christ, Babylon to the Messiah is the means through which renewal is coming, and that's key for us to recognize. So we're going to spend a good bit of time in this section thinking about the Messiah. The way the 40 to 66 break down into three sections mainly. You get a sense of this if you read through it. 40 to 48. Again, we're always trying to find more manageable ways to deal with this large text, and it breaks down into some have described these sections as scrolls, and that may very well have been how the original text was composed in these sections. But 40 to 48 has to do with comfort for the exiles, some other things. 49 to 55 are messianic documents, is how I've described those, and a lot of people are very familiar, of course, with that section, and the way the Messiah is described, the suffering servant of the Lord. And then there's some admonitions that are given in 56 to 66 that we'll get into. And then the other feature that you probably have forgotten about that we'll begin to pay more attention to in this section are the songs of Messiah. So there are the way this is written, that there are songs, and we've talked about songs already. That there's some songs in the first book, some sad songs. We said, very depressing songs. Here with the Messiah, there are 4 of them. In 42, 49, 50, and then 52 to 53. And again, we might not recognize the lyrical structure of all this and the poetry that's there, but it's worth pointing out the way it's composed. The other thing that is prominent in this section is the book's use of the servant. So the servant is mentioned several times in this section of Isaiah, and the question becomes, when you come across the servant, is who is the servant? Who is the writer talking about? Is he talking about himself? Is the servant Isaiah? Is the servant the Messiah? Is the servant Israel? And then we might even ask more questions about, well, who's Israel? And taking it a step further. But that's where we have to be careful in trying to identify who the author is really talking about and describing. So we'll pick up on that as we go through. So that's all from the introduction that we looked at a good little while ago. Now we focus in on 40 to 66. We're not going to we'll get as far as we get, I guess, tonight. But 40 to 48, this is the section that we're really going to start to focus in on. And what I try to do in teaching a book like this is, in looking at it in manageable sections, I want you to be able to see the cohesiveness of the text. There is a thought process here. And when you take up Isaiah 40 and just start reading, you might not be able to see that. I mean, usually the most structure that we get are the chapters and verses. And if you can see the structure, if you can see a pattern of thought, then you can understand the dynamic of this. And I'll hopefully be able to show you some of that in what we'll get in tonight. So in 40 to 48, it's very hopeful. I mean, it is about comfort, and we'll notice that here in a few minutes. It deals about hope and comfort. But then it changes somewhat, and there's a trial. There's a trial that's described. I think that's a good way to describe what's here. Again, if you just start reading through this, you start to see all of these different descriptions of God, and then all of these descriptions of idols, and we come away with the point that, well, God is superior to idols. And that doesn't mean very much to us. Well, yes, God is superior to idols, but you've got to see what Isaiah is trying to do and what he describes. So there's some key texts through this line of thought that need to be pulled out in order for us to get the point that he's trying to make. That'll all hopefully make more sense when we get into the text here in a few minutes. So 40 to 48, I would say in the next week or so, if you just focus in on 40 to 48, especially after we talk a little bit about it tonight, you can start to see the dynamic of it, and it will make more sense. Again, focusing on things in more manageable pieces is very helpful. 49 to 55 is where God sends his servant. He sends his servant, or Israel, to be the light of the nations. He sends them to be the light of the nations. Of course, the interesting thing about it is, once again, Israel's going to fail. Now, we think that the failure is all behind them because we've seen judgment and condemnation. So there's about 100 years that lapse between chapter 39 and 40. And exile's behind them. So good days, are here in front of us. But we see them falling into the same kind of pattern where they misplace their faith. And it's just a continual problem that we have, misplaced trust. So God's going to do something new. That's what he says at the end of 48, which is really the conclusion of that section, but also the introduction of 49 and 55. He's going to do something new. Israel's failed. So if Israel is the chosen nation through whom God has chosen to work, to be faithful to the promises that he made for Abraham, what can he do? It would seem as though he can do nothing because everyone's failed him. Well, what's this new thing he's going to do? Well, he's going to, as he'll describe in the section, it's like he's going to roll up his sleeve and go to work. He's going to come here. He's going to send his servant. That's what the Messiah is going to do. The Messiah becomes the lone, faithful Israelite. The Messiah is going to do what Israel did not. He's going to become the light to the nations, the light of the world, as he's come to be understood. Then as we get into 56 to 66, these last 10 chapters, the servants inherit God's kingdom. That's what's coming. And we've already seen glimpses of that in the first book. There seems to be a new creation that's described. Where you had, there's sections in the first book where you have these opposites, the predator and prey, enemies seem to be making peace. Predator and prey are able to live together. The child is playing with a snake, and it's a new creation where there's peace and harmony and goodness. One of the great lines of Isaiah is he's looking forward to the time in which the knowledge of God is going to fill the earth as the waters cover the sea. And that's what you start to see articulated at the end in these last 10 chapters. I've said to you earlier that Isaiah is to the Old Testament what Romans is to the New. Now, this is what Paul explains in Romans, is how Messiah fulfills all of this. And so Isaiah is looking forward in time. He's seeing what has already happened in the past and brings it to his present time. And while a lot has developed, there's yet a great deal that needs to happen. And he sees the consequence of that. Now, what anybody knows of this or understands, I don't think we fully understand the consequence of what he's writing, despite the fact we know who the Messiah is and what he accomplished for the world. But it remains, I mean, that's kind of the nature of hope. The nature of hope is designed to keep us focused and moving forward. We're anticipating something. We may not fully understand what it is, but we know it's good, overwhelmingly positive, as God is seeking to pour His love into our lives and into our world. And so we continue to be faithful and to move forward. Paul concludes Romans by making the point that God rules the world through hope. And you will leave feeling hopeful as you read through this section. This section of Isaiah is as famous a text as there is. If you hear it sung every Christmas, Handel set this to music. You should, if you have some time, listen to Handel's Messiah with an open Bible, and you can follow right through Isaiah 40 to 66. So it's an incredible. There is nothing in the world like these chapters. So hopefully that'll excite you about reading through them. One scholar says if you read Isaiah 40 to 66 every day for a month, it'll change your life. I don't disagree with that. So Isaiah 40, exile is over. Exile is over. Israel can return home. That's good news. And God's kingdom's coming. And this is Isaiah 40. This is really what the whole book is about. The rest of the book is about these points. And so we see the good news of this judgment being passed. And okay, we can go home, but what is this business about God's kingdom is coming? And that is more than just Israel can return home. And you think of the second chapter as the first indication that we get about God's kingdom coming, where all the nations are coming to Israel, they're coming to Jerusalem to be part of what God is doing. So that's what we see here. So in the first 5 verses, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that her warfare is ended, that her iniquity is pardoned, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. Well, that's good news. We may wonder about what exactly it means, but at least it's good. Comfort. So God is trying to comfort His people, to bring them consolation. It's interesting that when the infant Messiah is taken to Jerusalem, Simeon speaks of him as being the consolation of Israel, and we could see why. The kind of comfort he is able to provide, what that comfort really means for the world. This also is articulating really the affection that God has for His people. This is a very loving way. This is very different. It's very different in many respects than what we've seen in the first book. Now, in the first book, God's love for His people is not in question. And it is out of love that He punished them. The idea of that exile was ultimately to purify them, to help refine them, because He wasn't finished with them. He's going to continue He has a purpose for them. It is through that nation that the Messiah is ultimately going to come. But here it's speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that her warfare is ended. You don't whisper that. You don't. We're going to see that over and over in these. You don't whisper good news, do you? If you're really excited. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you can think of some times where you've had some good news to share with people, and you're just overwhelmingly excited about something. Maybe you think of the birth of your children. It's a pretty exciting moment in life. And you can say there's just nothing like it. And so when this good news comes, God's telling them to cry it out. I mean, later he's going to send people that say, go to the mountaintops and herald this good news. So what's the good news here in this text? What's the good news?
Well, what is coming? The warfare is ended, they're pardoned, and God is watching it.
Okay.
Although, to me, I mean, when this is written, that's like 150 years from when, or 100 years before it even starts, as far as Babylon and all that kind of stuff. So, what you would read if in that day was hope, I guess, but it's not comfort or nothing is changing at this point.
Yeah. And I think this, and there's a couple of places in the first part of the book where Isaiah writes this. There's this those 1 to 39 is sealed up, and or what he writes is sealed up. Eventually, it's going to be unsealed and opened and read and discussed. I mean, Jesus goes to the synagogue in Capernaum, and he reads from Isaiah. I mean, they read about this and talked about this and debated and argued about it, to be sure. So yes, what it means, it's not clear. In time, it will be made clear. But the good news is, number one, that the warfare is ended. The warfare is ended, which means what? If it's not wartime, what is it? It's peacetime. Okay, very good. So if you go back to, I think it was chapter 9, the Prince of Peace is described for us. Messiah is associated with peace. His kingdom is associated with peace. So if his kingdom is coming, well, warfare has got to be ended. Now, you say, well, warfare, that has to do with Babylon and the exile being ended, and it certainly does, but it's broader than that. Her iniquities pardoned. So Israel was to be blamed, right? They were as guilty as sin, and that's the case that is made to them in the first 39 chapters. And what is stated here is that, well, their iniquity, it has been paid for, and there's a couple different ways that's translated. Pardon is I don't know if pardon is quite the right term. Pardon is when you're guilty, but we're pardoning you, so you're not going to be punished. Well, they've been punished, and that punishment has been satisfied. And it goes on to say that she's received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. So that expression gets into the idea of that it has been atoned for. It has been the debt's been paid.
The sentence has been fulfilled.
The sentence has been fulfilled. Good way to put it. So it's a new day. It is a new day. There is a new beginning here for God's people and for the world. That's the introduction to this second book. In 6 to 8 it says, a voice says, cry. And I said, what shall I cry? All flesh is grass, and its beauty is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades when the breath of the Lord blows on it. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. The word of our God will stand forever. So, That's not what I wanted. I wanted 3 to 5. 3 to 5. What did I have here? I've got it. I know what I did, but you don't care. 3 to 5. We'll come back to 6 to 8. 3 to 5. A voice says, in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low. The uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. Okay. Now here's a perfect example of it. We know what this is about. What's this about?
John the Baptist?
Okay, John the Baptist. Very good, right? You go to the New Testament, you can see where this is explained. You can see where Jesus makes it perfectly. Jesus is the one who makes the connection between his cousin and this text. He would go on to say that, among the prophets there was no one greater than his cousin John. But that means nothing if you just isolate this down. But we don't even know who the Messiah is, let alone his cousin, right? So if we kind of put that off to the side, put John to the side, what's that about?
The Lord's coming.
The Lord's coming. Yeah, the Lord's coming. What about the Lord's coming? I mean, what's the point of in the wilderness? Now, what goes on in the wilderness?
Briars, brambles, and all kinds of dangers involved.
Yeah.
Rough territory.
Mm-hmm.
This is proclaiming the way is going to be clear and made straight, and the hills are going to be flattened out, and the low places are rised up. It's going to become a new land, a new place.
Yeah.
A glorious place.
Yeah. It's going to be transformed. And in being transformed, then the Lord is accessible. Part of it is he's accessible. So something transformational is going to happen. And of course, when we move forward in time and we see this hermit, this recluse, crazy man, out of the Jordan River, and the story picks up, and you start to see that taking place. To the transformation, even when John and Jesus are connected, it's not clear, but there are glimpses of transformation. That's what happens at the Jordan River when when Jesus is baptized by John, and heaven opens, heaven and earth are connected. That's what makes the difference, and the seal of approval is placed upon Jesus. He's not just Jesus of Nazareth, but this is the Father's Son, and he is the one through whom God is going to work to bring about this transformation. Now 6 to 8. 6 to 8 is making the point that this is going to happen. You could have just as well have found this paragraph in the first book. When God says something's going to happen, when God declares it, there's nothing you can do to change it, to alter it, to stop it from happening. So the contrast is made between God and grass and flesh. We think about things that are temporary, that die, and God's word is unlike all of that.
Well, and I think if this had showed up in the first half of the book, the reaction to it would have been very different than what you get in this one, because in this part with all the comfort, at the beginning of it, this should just enforce that feeling of this is going to happen, that this comfort is going to happen, and I can take joy and hope in that God's word, that this this is going to happen. God's word is going to be fulfilled. I mean, before, with all the judgment and stuff, maybe in the back of our mind, they're kind of hoping, like, well, maybe, God will change his mind and this won't happen, but then, we really want to know that the Comforter is coming.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we want to be able to put stock in that and be like, yes, we have confidence that heaven is coming.
Yeah.
Like, we have to have confidence in that.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say the word doesn't fail, well, that's confidence.
Yeah. Does Israel have confidence?
Up and down.
Right now, they don't. And that, we'll get there. We'll get there. It explains the fact that they don't. Explains the dynamic of this text. So more of that here in a minute. So in verse 9, it begins to describe the greatness of God. Israel's got a problem. And if you keep reading, you have to keep reading a little bit before you finally find where the problem is identified. And you have to do this sometimes in reading generally, right? You have to got to read ahead. You want to understand Paul, sometimes you have to read backwards. And when we're so wedded to this verse by verse, phrase by phrase way of studying the scriptures that we never see the big picture. But the problem is stated in verse 27. And if you can get this verse is key. If you get this verse, you'll understand 40 to 47. This is not just a comparison of God's better than idols. Our children could do that. This is not a pros and cons list that Isaiah is putting here. In verse 27, it says, "Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God." Israel's gone through a captivity. They've been in Babylon for a generation, long time. They've been exposed to a very different culture. Even in ways that they had not been exposed to, even when they were idolatrous in their own land. They've been living in, exposed to the culture of Babylon, and now they're going back. And what this is getting at, God is the one asking, why do you say this? He's getting at an attitude, a perspective, a mindset that is common among Israel at this point in time, as they're beginning this return. Maybe another way of putting it is, maybe the gods of Babylon are greater than Yahweh. Maybe they're greater. Maybe God has changed his mind. Maybe God's not going to do what he says. Maybe he's not who he said he was. And there's doubt. And Isaiah is answering that.
New American Standard translation of the last part of 27 is, "And the justice due me escapes the notice of my God." Mm-hmm. It's just like we got away with it, almost.
Yeah. So that explains the dynamic of this section. It's addressing this attitude that Israel has. So the response that we have in this section is exile was judgment. It was not neglect. Exile was judgment. It was not neglect. If we think about what is stated way back in chapter 13, God would use Persia to conquer Babylon for Israel's sake. Right? They're going to be punished. The Babylonians are going to take them, but God's going to use Persia to conquer Babylon and release Israel because he's not done with them. Again, if you go to If you read more of the Old Testament, that's what Ezra and Nehemiah are all about. This return and what God has in store in the future. Israel remains unfaithful, so Yahweh will do something new. And that's really what you have here. You have unfaithfulness in Israel, and that's what this period of time that we often think about. It's described in a couple different ways. You've probably heard between the covenants or between the testaments, a little blank page between the Old Testament, New Testament, the intertestamental period. The Second Temple period is more to, I think, how scholars describe it. Israel becomes unfaithful during that period of time, and they have been influenced heavily by Greco-Roman culture, the Hellenization of, you can think that things you've studied in the past, I'm sure, the Hellenization of the Jewish people. They're not recognizable as God's people when Jesus comes to the world. And you start reading through the New Testament, you got it. Maybe you don't ask the question. I'm sure some people don't and just take it for granted. But hey, who are the Pharisees? Where did they come from? Sadducees. Where did this Sanhedrin Council? Where did that come from? There's all kinds of things that develop during this period of time. So that I think is accounted for in this section. That Israel's going to become unfaithful again, so God's going to do something new. The Messiah is someone new. Did you have something you wanted to?
Yeah, you're talking about like the Pharisees and Sadducees coming out and Sanhedrin and all that. Is it at the same time that they started making synagogues and all happened? There wasn't a command for any of those things before.
Yeah.
And during that period, they started kind of making their own stuff and all that stuff.
Yeah. And that happens over a long period of time. Right. We're looking at 430 years roughly. That's a long time.
There wasn't such thing as separation between church and state. So that was kind of inevitable. They were going to utilize people that were more wise, that were more educated to help rule the people. And you can see why humans would naturally just fall into putting an order to things in that fashion. It wasn't so much that they did that. It was that they were falling away from the commands and falling away from the way.
Yeah.
It's how they were going about it.
Yeah. And that's like the Pharisees. That's how they get started, right? They're a separatist movement. Let's get back to the law. That showing you how far removed from the law that they had become. So Israel becomes unfaithful, and that 40 verse 27 is the key. It's the key to explaining what Isaiah is doing in this text. So it's not just a comparison of God and idols. They're having questions and doubts about the faithfulness of Yahweh. Anything else about that? Okay. Well, in the time we have left, I want to just start going through the rest of 41. It's a great read, and there's some great points that are made. The text is directing us to focus on God. And so he says in verse 9, "Go up on a high mountain, on Zion, herald of good news. Lift up your voice with strength. O Jerusalem, herald of good news, lift it up, fear not. Say to the cities of Judah, behold your God. Behold, the Lord God comes with might, and his arm rules for him. Behold, his reward is with him, and his recompense before him. He will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom and gently lead those that are with young." That's a very tender, affectionate way that God is described here. It's it's quite a difference between the God who is bringing judgment and punishment to the nations, than describing him like a shepherd who lovingly is going to rescue and care for the lambs in his arms. Verse 12, it says, "Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and marked off the heavens with a span, enclosed the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance? Who has measured the Spirit of the Lord? Or what man shows him his counsel? Whom did he consult? And who made him understand? Who taught him the path of justice, and taught him knowledge, and showed him the way of understanding? Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and are accounted as the dust of the scales. Behold, he takes up the coastlands like fine dust. Lebanon would not suffice for fuel, nor the beasts enough for a burnt offering. All the nations are as nothing before him, and they are accounted by him as less than nothing and emptiness." Now, you read that and you think back to all of what was stated in the first book. How these nations think they're in control. They think they're the ones who are ruling. And yet God says here, this is going to happen, and that's going to happen. And it ultimately comes to pass. Lebanon would not suffice for fuel. You think of the cedars of Lebanon. It was a forest. And that was that's what they used to build their wealth in trading all of that. And it doesn't mean anything to him. To whom then, in verse 18, to whom then will you liken God? Or what likeness compares with him? An idol? A craftsman casts it, and a goldsmith overlays it with gold and casts for it silver chains. He who is too impoverished for an offering chooses wood that will not rot. He seeks out a skillful craftsman to set up an idol that will not move. So not only does Isaiah, is he condescending toward the idol, but he's condescending toward the man who makes the idol. The man who makes the idol, he says, can't even afford to buy an offering to sacrifice to the idol. You see the absurdity of it all. In verse 21, do you not know? Do you not hear? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundation of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain, and spreads them like a tent to dwell in, who brings princes to nothing, and makes rulers of the earth as emptiness. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown, scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth, when he blows on them, and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. To whom then will you compare me, that I should be like him, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high and see who created these. He who brings out their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might and by his strong power, not one is missing. Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God? Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who have no might he increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. I mean, this is as strong a rebuke to Israel as it was when God rebuked Job. Israel knew all of this. That's the point he's making. They knew all of this. Better than anyone else in the world, they knew all of this. They knew of the greatness of the true and living God. But their faith is now in question. And so, at the end of the chapter, in verse 28, he's at, have you not known? Well, yeah, they had known. They had heard this. This is what they had not just heard, but they had experienced firsthand. If you think about, for example, being liberated from Egypt and led to Canaan. And then the way they worshipped, the Psalms, the way they worshipped was all about rehearsing the mighty acts of God, remembering that. That's really what worship is all about, is rehearsing the mighty acts of God, which for us all point and lead toward cross and resurrection of the Messiah. So he tells them to be faithful is the point of this text. And again, this is some of the more memorable lines of Isaiah. Those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. That's what these people needed to do. They needed to learn to wait for the Lord. And well, what is waiting? Well, waiting is all about faith, right? If you know, that waiting goes right along with hope. You're expecting something to happen. God's made promises, and they knew of the promises. He's going to be faithful to these promises. Maybe they needed to spend more time in a text like Isaiah, reading from the prophets and learning about what God had yet to accomplish. And that's what he's wanting them to do. He wants them to wait for the Lord, and if they wait, then he says that their strength is going to be renewed. So this is how God interacts, how he sustains a relationship with his people. It's through faith. Through faith. All right. So, verse 27 is key. Read 40 to 48 before Sunday. See if you can keep up with the dynamic of what Isaiah's doing in that section. Up there. Thank you.
I'm Elizabeth. Charles, nice to meet you.
How you doing?
Good, good to see you.
Oh, yeah. Good. Pretty good. Yeah.
She wasn't only on music, so. I'm waiting on me to get my mother a little. Hello. How's it going? Doing good. Every day is better, yeah. Every day gets a little, kind of know where things are. And learn, you know, go through another one or where the new stuff. I try to put it in a nervous breakdown, really. But yeah.
But that's good, so she just happened to like start from the beginning of PT, or